What is giftedness? According to the National Organization of Gifted Children, students, children, or youth who give evidence of high achievement capability in areas such as intellectual, creative, artistic, or leadership capacity, or in specific academic fields, and who need services and activities not ordinarily provided by the school in order to fully develop those capabilities.
So that's the definition that's used by the federal government of the United States. Do you think that's followed all across the country?
I know that there's a lot of different definitions and it's open to interpretation, or it's evolving over time, especially because that would just be specific to the US, and I'm sure it's different, it varies country by country as well, their own interpretation or understanding.
I think that in some areas of the world there are probably greater emphases on the achievement aspects or possibly greater emphasis on creative aspects.
Yes, for sure. And I think even in the same country, you probably have different cultures with different values of what they consider as gifted or high intelligence.
Absolutely, especially as the demands or what, each country or place might be asking of their students, right? So some people might have different capabilities that are apparent or that they utilize more. So it creates a lot of variation.
Well, I wonder what do people actually think, like teachers, students themselves?
I know that even in my own area, there are still some misconceptions that we run into and even myths about giftedness. Let's listen to a tape from one of our students.
My name is Lily. I'm 8 years old and I'm in 3rd grade. I'm really good at some things that we haven't learned yet, like times and division. But that doesn't mean that I'm good at everything. My teachers seem to think that I'm good at everything, but I'm not, just because I'm in G&T. Some things are going to be hard, but I'm just going to have to work through it. When I'm learning, I feel like when they use words that I don't know, I can't understand, and they think that I'm always supposed to understand it. I like projects and hands-on craft. I made a giant house out of canvases once. And I built a kaleidoscope with my friends. So it is interesting with my friends. I'm with other people, and it doesn't just have to be my work.
So Liliana's comments really illustrate some of the common misconceptions that we run into with gifted education and myths about gifted students. For example, there's this idea that gifted students don't need help. They're going to be just fine on their own without any tutoring or assistance. Have you ever seen that playing out in education?
I certainly have. I think it's really interesting, too, that at such a young age, she's able to even identify that, she prefers or enjoys working in a collaborative capacity, whether it's the teacher supporting her in those pursuits in the classroom, or she's benefiting from working with some other students or peers her age. I think it's really indicative of her intelligence, especially at 8 or just in 3rd grade, to be able to recognize that she does better when she has support. It makes her feel more confident about what she's able to put out and produce within the classroom.
To add to that, I think sometimes they struggle with being quite advanced in certain areas, and people assume that they are okay in every area. And I think that brings us to our second myth. Students can't be gifted. They're receiving poor grades.
And also the gifted kids are star students that are going to excel in all areas. Being gifted automatically means they're going to be good at everything. Those two things really go together, because sometimes you can be gifted in mathematics or gifted in creativity and expression. And yet that doesn't mean that it's going to be across the board.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the research that's been done in the last few decades, or 5 or 6 decades in neuroscience, has really come to demonstrate that the brain, different portions of the brain, are used for different things that we do throughout our life or the day-to-day life. And I think that helps to highlight the fact that gifted students it's not an all or nothing thing. They're not excelling at everything because, they have advantages in certain areas that allow them to excel, and then challenges in others.
That kind of brings us to what is a gifted student, right? We've got some gifted students who may also have disabilities, learning challenges. We've got some gifted students who have more than one areas of giftedness: sports, creativity, and intellectually. I think that really is no one size fits all.
So giftedness is not a synonym for high achieving. There really are a lot of different types of giftedness. And even with a student or an individual who's clearly gifted, they're not going to act gifted all the time. If we look at the work of Joe Renzulli was very clear that gifted traits emerge in certain people at certain times under certain circumstances. Being gifted is not a state of being that's going to be evident at every moment throughout life.
I absolutely agree with that, because I think it really depends on the environment that they are, they grew up in. If they had a chance to explore, had a chance to ask and experiment, then you definitely see them emerge earlier. But if they didn't have that chance, then you'd never even discover that they're gifted.
I think what you're talking about right now, Florence, also hits on the impact of the positive environment for a child who has maybe come from circumstances of deprivation. For example, if they have a history of trauma or a history of extreme economic difficulty, and then they come into circumstances where they are nurtured and given opportunities and given challenges of inquiry, they can really begin to flourish and discover their own potentials. I've seen that occur with some of my own students.
Right. The importance of that, early development is so crucial in being able to foster those, not only the abilities, but the confidence in their own abilities, right? They can kind of recognize those things in themselves and then be able to apply that confidence further in their education as they kind of grow. But if they don't have that support or that guidance, or they're not identified as gifted individuals and they don't understand or have that self-awareness, it's hard for them to, be as successful as they possibly could be as they get older. So that's such a crucial time for kids to be able to have that environment that supports their understanding of themselves and opportunities.
Development of self-efficacy really does speak to the capacity to express one's potential. And yet there's also that myth that all children are gifted. That's a myth as well, because not everyone, even given all of the opportunities and all of the supports, is going to suddenly evidence gifted behaviors. Gifted behavior is that, as we look back at that federal definition, that's that advanced capacity to learn, advanced capacity to apply what's learned, or to show an exceptional creative expression in performing or fine arts. And if, again, we're looking at that federal definition, we're looking at that child needing modifications to regular curriculum to provide adequate challenge to continue growing from that point of readiness. And it doesn't mean that that child is better in any way. It just means that child has different needs. They are needing scaffolding from a higher starting point in order to be able to continue growing forward from that starting point.
I think that's such an important distinction to make, right? Because if we're going to continue having conversations about the value of, education that's geared towards, assisting gifted individuals and things like that, we need people to understand that gifted is just a term that's referred to like a specific context, not that a group of students is better than anybody else. It's just an identifier so that we can better support students with varying abilities.
That really comes back on yet another myth about gifted education being elitist. It's not an elitist term. It's not a label that you wear like a badge or a star. It's an identification of need, that these students have different needs. If we think about the normal curve and the differences between learners, students who have special learning needs at a different end of the continuum would need different supports in order to grow from their point of readiness, if they need additional supports there. But students who are at the upper tail of that normal curve, they have learning needs as well in order to grow from where they are. And that's what we're talking about with giftedness, is letting them continue to grow from where they are. And when we look at giftedness as an area of need and learning needs, we also need to think about what happens if those needs aren't met. Sometimes when I get kids referred to me for the gifted program, I hear the comment that, well, you can't really take that child's a behavior problem. But that starts to hit into another myth that gifted children are going to be well-behaved, compliant, eager learners, and that's not always the case. Some of the students that I have come to me start out with some pretty challenging behaviors, and that is because their learning needs and their emotional needs, their SEL needs, are not being met in the regular classroom. They have some pretty extreme desires for inquiry and for challenge, and if they are in an environment that is not adequately stimulating or challenging for them, they will be acting out, and the acting out is not a pleasant experience for them or for their teachers and classmates. But if they're moved into an environment where they get more of what they need, things can change in a positive way. Absolutely.
I think a lot of times we're looking at the outcome of students not being, their stimulation not being met, the novelty that they're seeking out isn't being met. So then they're kind of doing it in their own way, and that can be seen as, behavior problems. And if we're not focusing on what's causing the behavior problems and just trying to offer consequences, then we're really missing the mark on what those students' needs are.
Yeah. You mentioned the need for novelty, that if we don't make it fun, they'll make it fun.
For better or worse.
It can even get to a worse scenario whereby we've got out-of-the-box thinkers who gets punished for not following instructions, instead of being valued for their innovative solution. And that's how we lose our innovators, right? Future scientists. Yeah. And that's just because it kind of make them lose their inherent curiosity, openness to learning, joy of learning,
And then we have some teachers who feel they're being challenged if the students are asking probing questions. Teachers may say to me, why does he keep asking me all these questions? Or why can't you just accept what I said? And if the student is talking about, say, colonization, and the teacher is using the term Christian when they're talking about Protestant settlers, and the student is correcting them, it's because in the student's mind, those are very specific details that matter.
I think that really serves to demonstrate just how important it is for us to be able to understand as educators, as teachers, as people in the field, why it's so important that students are thinking differently. Because if teachers are unaware of those differences, then it's hard to understand what those students' needs are.
And we'll get to dive into a lot more of this and other topics regarding strengths and challenges in our next episodes.